Hey everybody, Jeremy with My Lawn Turf and Tree. We are here now. We want to just help you guys understand what might be going on with your pine trees. We've seen a lot of decline, a lot of dieback on our pine trees here in central Kansas, and hopefully this video can help you understand and maybe even help you diagnose what might be going on with your pine trees. So we're going to talk about several things that we see that is causing the majority of our problems in our area. The first one we're going to talk about is Diplodia tip blight. Diplodia tip blight is a fungus that infects the tree usually early in the spring when the environmental conditions are correct, when it's cool and wet, which normally it is in the spring. That's when we're going to see if those spores are present within the area of that tree. Good chance your tree's going to be infected. So what happens with Diplodia attacks the end of the shoot growth on your pine trees, especially Austrian and Scotch. Those are the ones we'll be talking about most of the time when we're talking about these trees here, because that's what the majority of everybody has in our area. So when Diplodia infects the tree, the candle growth at the end of the tree is infected, and when it elongates and creates these needles, it stunts the growth, and eventually it kills them. Okay, so Diplodia is pretty significant. It's really hard on the trees because we don't like losing new growth. We want to make sure that new growth is healthy, and if we have Diplodia infect the tree year after year and it continues to kill the new growth, the tree is going to suffer pretty substantially and it can die. It just depends on how significant the infestation is and how long it's happened. Usually if you've had Diplodia 2 or 3 years in a row, that tree is going to be it's in some serious trouble. So this is another picture where you can kind of see where Diplodia has infected this particular tree. It's got very short, stunted growth. And you can see the healthier needles here where they're nice and green and they're long. So that part of the tree was not infected, but this was here at the end. So that's what Diplodia looks like. And if you look at this picture here, you can see that these branches are completely dead, and it's down at the base of the tree. You can see as you go up the tree, is not nearly as significant, right? So that's another key indication of a fungus. Usually the fungus starts at the bottom and it works its way up the tree. If you have pine wilt, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, it's kind of the opposite effect. So it'll kind of die from the top down and very rapidly if you have pine wilt. But with Diplodia, it can, we were talking about how it affects the shoot growth. Well, once Diplodia infects that new candle development, it can actually move down the branch and create some cankers that kill the entire branch. So Diplodia is a nasty fungus. It causes a lot of problems with these pine trees. So be on the lookout for that. And you also want to, if you look underneath here, underneath the pine tree, you can see how these branches have been touching the ground. Well, if you're trying to have in a well-maintained landscape, we want to make sure these branches are lifted up. We don't want them in contact with the soil, because a lot of times those spores stay down in that area, and they'll also stay on these needles and as well as the pine cones. So we want to make sure that we, good housekeeping, getting the limbs lifted up off the ground, keep all of the needles raked up. And if you have any pine cones, I'll show you a picture of this too. This is another good indication that you have Diplodia tip blight. If you look at this pine cone here, there's you can see all of these little speckles, almost like it's been peppered. Those are the spores, the Diplodia spore that reinfects the tree next spring. So this, the infection on both of these fungus that we're going to talk about happens in the spring. Diplodia is early in the spring. Dopstroma is later in the spring. So if you have this peppering on your pine cones and you have this stunted needle growth, 100% you had Diplodia. 99.9, I'll say, that you have Diplodia. on the tree. This is another picture of what can happen in what your tree, and we see this all the time in our area. We'll see all of these pine trees in really significant stress here. It's lost a lot of growth throughout the interior canopy. So this one here's probably, I think this tree actually had both funguses. It had Diplodia and Dophystroma. So if you get both of those fungus working against you, that tree, it can look like it got killed by pine wilt. If you don't know the history of the tree. But if this has happened in a period of 4 or 5 years, that's usually just repetitive infestations or infection from Diplodia or Dophystroma. So, whoops. That's what I want to talk about with Diplodia. So I'm going to come back here and we're going to start talking about this other fungus that we see in our area quite a bit too. And it's called Dophystroma. So Diplodia affects the new growth. Dophystroma affects the older growth. Pine trees with, pine needles will usually live anywhere. They can stay on the tree from 3 to 5 years. It just kind of depends on the environmental conditions and the health of the tree. The variety of the tree has something to do with it too. Some pine trees hold on to their needles longer than others. So Dophystroma, it's important to know the difference because Dophystroma is going to attack the older growth. All right. So you can see all of the blighting on these needles and the banding like this here. You can see where this band, this is where that Dophystroma infected it, and then it kills the needle all the way to the tip. And that's a good indication of Dophystroma, And so sometimes you'll see these real short on the inside of on the interior of your canopy on your pine trees. If you see these short green needles and the rest of them are really long, well, that short needle is probably because, it's really windy here in central Kansas. We know that. So when that wind rips through these trees, if that needle is damaged enough right here by this banding, it'll just snap it off. So it'll leave you with this little short green stubby needle. So, okay, here's another good picture. This is a pine tree that you can see. This is the new growth right here. Good, healthy growth. And then when you come down below here, about the down lower on the shoot growth, you can see all of these older needles are dead. So that's what Dophystroma does. Dophystroma will end up, it doesn't affect the new growth, it attacks the new growth. So Dophystroma is pretty prevalent in our area. We see it a lot. It's not nearly as bad on the tree. It's not as hard on the tree as, say, Diplodia is, because, again, Diplodia continues to kill the new growth. That tree's not going to have anything left because we have natural needle drop too. Usually after 3 years, you're going to start losing needles naturally. So if you don't have any new growth and you're losing the old growth from natural dropping, you got nothing left on the tree. So, but Dophystroma it's still important to keep it under control on your trees. So here's another good picture of the banding. This is how it looked before it ended up killing the rest of the needle. So if you see this little red banding, that's Dophystroma. Okay, here's another kind of a good picture of a tree that had some had Dophystroma. Again, you can see the cluster right here, nice and green. Then right below it, you have some dead needles that have been infected by Dophystroma. Okay, this is a pretty good picture too. This, and if you remember the other picture here, sorry, I got to get a better system in place here. Let me find it. This tree here is in way worse trouble than this other one is. So you can tell on this tree here, it hasn't had Diplodia. This one has not had that other fungus because you can see there's a lot of new growth through the entire canopy on this tree. So this one here, though, you can tell it has had some pretty serious issues with Dophystroma for 3 or 4 years. That's why it's so thin. It's been killing the older growth for several years in a row, but the new growth at the ends has been keeping the tree alive. But that's not going to last very long either. You know, we once we lose about 60% of our needles on our pine tree, man, they're hard to recover after that. So that's Dothroma, and it's the same with, you know, when we're talking about the housekeeping. Make sure that you're keeping those needles cleaned up underneath the drip line of your tree. So that's just going to help, again, prevent reinfestation of Dothroma on your pine tree, and also making sure that you keep your canopy raised up off of the ground. So when we'll get some phone calls, and we'll have a tree that looks like this, and they will think that they have pine wilt and that they need to cut it down and get it out of there. Well, pine wilt, this tree here had pine wilt. Pine wilt will kill a tree in about 3 weeks, 3 weeks to 8 weeks, you know, maybe a little bit longer, just kind of depends on the significance of the infestation. But like this tree here, this one died from pine wilt. It's done. There's nothing you can do about it. You can see there's a lot of needles still on the tree that, you know, compared to the ones that we've seen here, it's just thin. You don't hardly see any needles within the interior of the canopy. They've dropped off. Well, that don't happen with pine wilt. Pine wilt keeps those needles on there, but they're dead, and it happens very quickly. So pine wilt is, and again, you probably understand why this is a little confusing. We wanted to put this out here so you could, you know, help you understand what you're looking at, because they all look so much alike. So hopefully this is helping you guys. But with pine wilt happens usually when the pine sawyer beetle emerges in the spring. Usually, I would say, it depends on the season, but end of March to the end of April, sometime in there, the pine sawyer beetle emerges, and the pine sawyer beetle carries these nematodes on it. If the nematode is present in the tree that they're leaving, well, these nematodes, when present, will attach themselves to the underside of the pine sawyer beetle, or they can even get in the respiratory system somehow. And when these beetles fly and they go to a tree that they're attracted to, when they start chewing on the trunk or the branch of that tree and they leave these little tiny holes, well, the nematode now enters in those holes. And once the nematode enters that tree, they will start, you know, their population increases, and it's just a boom of reproducing, you know, and these nematodes just go crazy, and they clog the vascular system of the tree, which means they prevent any water from moving throughout the tree. So if you have an infestation, usually it's towards it can be anywhere within the tree, but usually it's towards the bottom. Well, it stops movement. And then, so if this can't get any water throughout this entire canopy, throughout these different leaders, they die very quickly. And that's why, you know, again, you'll see a tree that's infected with pine wilt 3 weeks to 3 months tops, I would say. So that's and this is want to talk a little bit, and we're going to talk about good housekeeping again here in a minute, but this is important right here. This is blue stain fungus. So when we have larger dead in our pine trees, I would say anything that's maybe 1.5 inches to 2 inches in diameter, anything that's big in your tree that's dead, as it's declining, well, these beetles can also spread blue stain fungus. And blue stain fungus is important. This is a fungus that we see in dying and decaying wood, especially on our pine trees. Well, the nematodes that come aboard, I guess, with the pine sawyer beetle thrives on this. This is like their superfood. So, but the pine sawyer beetle is attracted to this. Okay, so that's why it's important to make sure, if you have a pine tree, if you have any dead in your pine tree, you need to get it cleaned out. You want to get all that dead wood out of there before you start having significant issues with blue stain fungus. So not every tree that is attacked by a pine sawyer beetle is going to get pine wilt, right? But the more opportunity that you give these pine sawyer beetles to be attracted to a tree like this that has dead and decaying wood within the tree, the more beetles that come to attack it, the more, obviously, the higher percentage, or the more likely you're going to be to have a problem with pine wilt in the future, because eventually you're going to have a beetle that comes that does have that's carrying the nematode that causes pine wilt. So make sure that you're keeping the dead cleaned out of your trees. So this is what that pine sawyer beetle looks like here. And again, it's not even the problem. The pine sawyer beetle doesn't do the problem to the tree. It does cause some little tiny injuries on the tree, but that doesn't hurt the tree really. It's the nematode that enters through that hole. So let me go back to this tree here. If you have a tree that you feel might have died from pine wilt, it's kind of your responsibility for your neighborhood, it's just kind of your civic duty to make sure that you remove this tree. Remove the tree, and the stump needs to be ground out. The whole tree needs to be taken. We've taken a lot of them out this year. It sucks, but what happens if you don't, and you have a tree that died this year? If you leave this tree here and you don't remove it and destroy the tree, that's the other thing too. You can't keep the wood. You got to take it and have it burned away from, and I know Barton County has an area that we can do that. They'll take pine trees that have been infested with pine wilt. They keep it separate. So we don't want to use it for firewood or anything. Get rid of the tree completely, because if you don't, next spring, all of those pine sawyer beetles, when they emerge, they're going to come from this tree that's infected, and those nematodes are going to piggyback to the next tree. Well, the next susceptible tree, all right? So make sure that you do remove your trees if you have, and even if they didn't die from pine wilt and they've just died over the years, remove them, get them out of there, because you're just going to continue to spread and make the problem even worse. So, okay, I want to talk a little bit now, real quick. I know this is getting long, but I wanted to visit with you about environmental stress and what it looks like. Because if you look at this kind of looks similar to the problem we seen on the tree that was infested with Dothroma, right? You got good healthy growth at the end, and then on the interior you have some, again, looks like dead needles. Well, this one here wasn't Dothroma. This was drought stress. This one had winter injury from a previous year that basically we didn't have any snow. We had high winds, super cold, and the tree wasn't able to keep up with the water needs, because pine trees and all evergreens transpire the entire year. It's not just during the spring, summer, and fall. Pine trees continue to transpire, meaning it's pulling moisture through the roots, going up the tree and pushing it out. And they're different than deciduous trees. Deciduous trees pull very little water up during the, like maples and oaks and just every deciduous tree. It doesn't transpire. That's why it drops its leaves. When a deciduous tree drops its leaf, it closes off that little petiole where the leaves attach to the stem, and no moisture can leave. Well, pine trees don't have that option. They continue to transpire all year long. That's why they're always green. So we want to make sure that we're watering our trees very well throughout the throughout the winter. If it's a desirable tree and you want it to look good, you've got to do some supplemental watering in the absence of snow or precipitation throughout the winter, because it's going to use water. I would say for every inch of diameter, if you have a 10-inch tree, let's say you got a 10-inch trunk, you want to water that tree about 50 gallons, 5 gallons of water per inch of diameter, all right? So if you got a 30-inch tree, you got a bigger tree, then 150 gallons once a month at least, in the absence of precipitation and snow. So that's here's another picture. I think this was a loblolly pine. We've been talking about Austrians and Scotch quite a bit, but I think this is a loblolly if I remember right. You can see it looks good on the ends, but interiorly you can see that it's stressed. So that happens again from just lack of water, winter injury. Make sure, and it can happen during the summer too. You just want to make sure that you are really keeping up with the watering needs of your trees. And when you do that, they're less likely to have problems with diplodia. They're less likely to have problems with Dothrosaroma, and they're less likely to seek the attention of a pine sawyer beetle. Because when you have a tree that's stressed and dying, they send off different hormones that attracts those beetles, all right? And as far as the funguses are concerned, it's no different than you and I. You know, if we are eating properly and we're staying hydrated and, you know, just taking care of ourselves, if and when we get sick, it's not going to be nearly as significant as if we were not taking care of ourselves and we catch some sort of a virus and it puts us on our butt. So it's no different with trees. Make sure you're taking care of them during the wintertime, especially our evergreens, and you're going to have better luck next spring. So there are applications that can be done to help prevent some of these problems that we're seeing with diplodia, with Dothrosaroma, and even with pine wilt. There are applications that can be made that will prevent your tree from having these problems in the future. So if you have any questions about those two, make sure you reach out to us. We understand things happen, but man, we hate cutting down trees. It's unfortunate, especially if there's something that you can do to prevent it, because it takes years and years and years. I mean, if you take a tree like this pine tree here, that's going to take 30 to 40 years to have something back like that. So make sure you're doing your, keep watering them. Make sure you're keeping needles cleaned up if you do have fungus present. So one more thing, sorry, if you don't have fungus underneath your trees and you got a beautiful, healthy pine tree, don't remove the needles underneath it. Leave those needles underneath the canopy. It's great mulch for the tree. It's important for just the natural nutrient cycling of the tree if you keep those needles there. But if you do have Dothrosaroma or diplodia, you do need to remove the needles. So hope that didn't just throw a curveball at you and confuse you. But anyway, hope this has helped. About ready to run out of things to talk about with these pine trees. But if you have any questions that I haven't addressed, feel free to give us a call. We'd love to help you out. And until the next time, we'll see you again soon. Happy Thanksgiving, by the way. All right, bye-bye.